My name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about the difference between needs from wounds versus your authentic core needs. So this is going to be sort of a continuation of a whole bunch of different sort of series and topics we've been discussing around needs. We do have a very in-depth needs course in the school, and in the month of October, we have an advanced needs course coming out that are going to discuss all of these things and so much more. And so this is sort of a continuation from an earlier video about needs that, if you haven't seen, will be very beneficial for you to watch, and really our needs as they relate to codependency, relationships, our sense of self, our identity, all these different things. So we're going to talk a lot about the differences here, and then we're going to go on in this series to continue to talk about the wounded needs of the anxious, the fearful, the dismissive, and what we can do about these different challenges we see in ourselves, and how we can regulate some of these things, and how this is actually giving us a lot of golden nuggets or opportunities to heal. So before I dive into this video, if you ever want to join the school, we have a sale we're running until COVID stuff, all the craziness is over. The coupon code is WITH YOU. It's all one word. It's for 25% off of all access to everything in there. Are 4 live webinars a week, all previously recorded courses, almost 200 or so past webinars that we have in there as well. And the link will be in the description box below, along with a link to our lifetime membership, which is 50% off for this month, which is our launch month of it, until October 10th. And I'll put a card on this video as well. So let's talk about this in quite a bit of detail for a moment. Oh, and by the way, I also, I was doing a bit of a series on the different types of deactivating strategies. I actually want to save it from after the first video to hear all of your feedback on what else you want to see, because I think it's such a juicy topic with so much to say. So I'm going to wait till I get some more questions so I can really make sure that the content I put out answers a lot of the questions that you have, and then we'll do the different types of FA deactivating strategies, AA activating strategies, and then what we can do in terms of overcoming these things. So that will be a separate topic. So let's talk about this right now. So the needs from wounds versus our authentic needs. How can we tell the difference? Well, first and foremost, this is going to be one of the most important things you ever do in your healing journey, which is the ability to recognize the difference with your conscious mind between needs that are coming from wounds versus needs that are actually your desires and the things that you want to create and bring into your life and the things that benefit you and you have a healthy, balanced, non-overly attached and addictive relationship to. And so why does this matter? Why do we have to know the difference between these two things? Well, first, we need to know the difference because we can't really heal the needs from wounds. We can't fill those cups or feel fulfilled in them from something outside of ourselves. What we actually have to do is we have to end the pattern of re-traumatization that exists within us on autopilot at a subconscious level that we have continued to fire and wire this entire time without realizing it, and not at the fault of ourselves, but because of an old imprint that was made into us, usually from a painful experience, that we didn't have better resources or tools to either reprogram or fill the wound so that it was, we became whole again in that area that we were wounded and we were experiencing lack as a result, especially as it relates to our needs. And so if we don't heal this internally, we will keep hungering for these needs from our wounds, from a space of desperation, and usually we'll have this really painful relationship and how we get these needs met from the things outside of us. So how do we notice the difference? Well, number one, you are going to feel that your needs coming from wounds instead of your authentic needs, your sort of adult healthy needs. These needs coming from wounds are going to feel overwhelmingly strong. You're going to feel a sense of desperation when you have these needs. Maybe somebody, let's say for example, you desperately want somebody to nurture you, to tend to you, to fix you, to save you. You're going to have more charged language around these needs. You're going to do things that are not necessarily characteristic of your overall personality and behavior to try to get these needs met. Like, for example, maybe you feel like you're a fairly confident person, but then you feel yourself repeatedly calling somebody when you're triggered around a deeply unmet need that seems to be going unmet again. Okay, so notice the difference in your life between the needs from wounds, what does that feel like, and your healthy adult authentic needs. And the healthy adult authentic needs will feel like the relationship you have to them is like you desire something the way you would desire to go for like a nice walk on like a beautiful summer day, or it feels like a healthy, non-attached, like I'm addicted to this thing, it better come through right now, it better work out right now. It's not sponsored by absolute lack somewhere within you. And what you want to recognize is these needs that are coming from wounds actually need reparenting within you, not somebody to fill something outside of you. Because when somebody fills this need from outside of you primarily, and you can have both, but if it's only external coming in and there's no you filling your own cup in relationship to this need first, then you are highly likely to develop some kind of neediness, desperation, extreme fear of loss, and a lot of charged emotions that can sometimes lead to toxicity, codependency, addictive patterns of behavior in relationship to these needs themselves. And what's most likely to happen when we have those things running is we're most likely to become our own saboteur at a subconscious level around the person or experience meeting our needs from the outside in. We're most likely to sabotage these things without meaning to, largely because at a subconscious level, if we don't feel worthy or deserving to receive because we're keeping ourselves in lack in the relationship to ourselves first, our subconscious feels outside of its comfort zone, and eventually we'll try to push that thing away despite another component of the self hungering and desiring for it. It feels still uncomfortable to receive. And a lot of people have this experience, just like as a really simple analogy with things like money, where it's like you are like, oh no, I need money, I'm in lack. And you feel this need, but then the moment, it comes to really managing your finances, it's like there's a hole in your pocket and you're spending all your money, or you're not investing or making proper financial decisions with your money, or have a savings plan or budget. And it's like you can have that neediness, but still have sabotaging patterns at the same time. And that's a really clear analogy that largely applies to our relationship dynamics when we have needs from wounds in our interpersonal relationships. And this can be all relationships, not just romantic. It can be friends, family, coworkers, all sorts of things. Needs you have from your boss that come from wounds, needs for approval, safety, security, acknowledgement, all kinds of things. So what you want to recognize that these things represent, the needs from wounds represent a deep lack within you, rarely something that is the result of the moment in front of you. Instead, it's sort of like one part of you is experiencing the now, and another part of you, which is more subconscious, is emotionally experiencing the past and the unmet needs from your past and what that felt like at the time being overlaid onto the now, onto your current experiences. And it is very useful to get good at telling the difference, because it's from that space that when we recognize that this is happening, we don't end up falling prey to or victim to whatever painful coping mechanisms we developed at the time. That maybe you were 7 years old at the time and your coping mechanism was to manipulate your way to get this need met, or to have a temper tantrum to get this need met. And now when you're sort of re-experiencing that, you have these adult versions of that happening, right? And so this is often what takes place when we have needs from wounds. We have painful or unhealthy coping mechanisms or strategies to get needs met, because usually they're the direct output of something we developed a long time ago that's become a program. So like, if I could explain this really clearly in an analogy, it's sort of like, let's say when you were a kid, you had a need from wound, and maybe that need that was so unmet that became this like wound-based need was the need for attention and acknowledgement. And then maybe you realize that when I get really mad and angry and loud and throw a temper tantrum, I suddenly get attention. And it's not exactly what I want, but the strategy helps meet the need enough. And so now you have this programmed in because it's been repetitive and it gave you emotional relief. And so you've got the repetition plus emotion that programmed the subconscious. So now you have this unmet need, and now you have this coping mechanism that maybe works when you're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then when you get into your adult life, it's not really working, but it's a program. And so maybe you have these adult versions of this where you're like all the way in your 40s or 50s or 20s still even, and you find yourself having these like adult temper tantrums when a need's unmet. And like we have to recognize, oh my goodness, this is a need from a wound. And we also have to recognize that the automatic behavioral coping mechanisms that we usually have sort of laced in there or like programmed in accompaniment with that need that's missing from the wound itself, these things usually have tremendous downsides in our adult lives if we don't update our strategies. So let's just say a really good example of this could be somebody pulls away. And I'm talking about like identifying this. So let's say somebody pulls away from you in a relationship, and maybe you're anxiously attached or fearful avoidant with a strong anxious side. And maybe you feel like young and childlike and afraid. And maybe you feel like, oh my goodness, like all this negative emotion, all this fear, all these things. You have to recognize, oh, this is an unmet need that's triggered right now coming from a wound. It's not necessarily my accurate adult representation of a need that I have right in this moment. Like if somebody pulls away, I should be okay. I should be able to go, okay, maybe it's early in the relationship. Maybe things aren't going to work. Or maybe I just need to give them some space and then have a conversation and say, hey, I noticed you pulled away. What's going on? And see if they want to communicate about it and the relationship can evolve in a healthy way. And if they don't, well, then maybe it's not the right relationship for me. But if we lose that like point of awareness from which to be able to think clearly and rationally about a situation, there's a pretty high chance that something's being triggered within us that can be a deeply unmet need, which is wound-based. And now we have these really strong coping mechanisms. And maybe when you're in that space, you call incessantly or can't go to work, or you feel so afraid, or you feel so like helpless to yourself. And that's because you're reliving an old trauma at the subconscious level. So what you have to recognize is that for this need from a wound to still exist, we have to still have a wounded place within us. And now, how does that happen if we were originally wounded decades ago, let's say? Maybe you have like this need from a wound at 8 years old. There was a perceived emotional abandonment from a caregiver. And now you're 38 years old and you're having this like experience like this in a relationship where you feel childlike and helpless and so afraid. And you can tell to a certain degree, okay, my reaction is disproportionate to what it could be or should be from a cognitive, conscious perspective. So what this means is that for that to still be impacting you 30 years later, you had to still be firing and wiring that same neural pathway in relationship to yourself. So in other words, you had to keep that need and lack this whole time. You had to keep feeling some feelings around abandonment. You had to still have these abandonment patterns in your life in order for them to still be affecting you from all that time ago. And this is usually what happens from a subconscious perspective. So these needs also represent a form of re-traumatization in relationship to the self that keeps you in lack, which keeps this need from a wound still intact. So some feelings to notice, okay, to help you catch if this is taking place that might be connected to this are things like feeling desperate, needy, afraid, having a temper tantrum, rage, extreme shutdowns, extreme coldness or numbness, a lot of shyness, heavy on feeling fear, frozenness, or literally feeling like you're a child, feeling childlike or young or small or helpless. And so a lot of these strong feelings usually represent old wounds being overlaid onto our present moment. And remember, we can have core wounds because of stories we're telling, but we can also have needs from wounds. So having this huge lack around something, and that's what's popping up, and it's creating a really strong response. So what this represents to a certain degree is like a place that your psyche froze in time. And what do we mean by frozen time? Well, you can think of like whenever we have a deeply unmet need or even a really painful story, we tend to develop these really strong coping mechanisms around that need. Just like I was mentioning earlier with like the 8-year-old who threw a temper tantrum, and then, that became her programmed response because through repetition and emotion, she kept having these temper tantrums and it kept getting her needs met a little. So in this space that we develop this like hard shell of a coping mechanism, it prevents us from actually emotionally processing what's under there and reflecting and healing and going through it and moving beyond it and evolving and emotionally growing. And so what if you imagine, just for an example, it's like an analogy, that you make a mistake at work, okay, in your adult life, totally separate situation from the girl throwing a temper tantrum. Let's say you make a mistake at work. You forget to turn a report in. Maybe you work in like a corporate office and you forget to turn something in, and then you just develop fear around it. And maybe your automatic coping mechanism is to like never look at why you turned in that report later, made a mistake, because it's so terrifying to you that you're just like, I'm going to avoid that altogether. Well, what happens? Well, if you avoid looking at something and trying to find like the root cause of why it occurred, or try to like change whatever made you make that mistake in the first place, you're not going to grow and evolve in that specific area of work, right? You're not going to, maybe it was time management. Well, not going to manage your time better if you don't go back and like look at the roots of what causes poor time management. Maybe it's perfectionism and it leads you to like analysis paralysis. And if you don't go in and look at what's creating that at the root level, if you just avoid the thing altogether, you're not giving yourself an opportunity to really grow and evolve. Now, the same analogy applies to all of our personal coping mechanisms as humans. So if we catch ourselves in like neediness mode, or in extreme calling mode, or in extreme boundary violation of ourselves mode, or in perfectionism mode, or whatever it is, if we don't go under there and really look, we don't grow up from the point that that thing became a coping mechanism. We don't grow up in that area. So if you are that person who every time you feel like you don't get attention or acknowledgement, you just have a temper tantrum, you're not growing up to like in that space. You're still the 5-year-old when that unmet need, when the wound from the need pops up for you. And or maybe the 7-year-old or 8-year-old or whatever it is for you. And this can occur across many versions, right? So let's say you don't get the need met. It's a wound. You develop a behavioral coping mechanism to protect yourself, like a temper tantrum or some kind of behavior to try to get the need met in some form. Unless you go back and deal with like either, okay, what's creating this big unmet need, or what's creating this lack, and how do I fill my cup in this area? How do I acknowledge myself, encourage myself, tell people that I love words of affirmation, diminish self-criticism in my life and become gentle and compassionate to myself so that my need, if it were a bucket, I don't have a hole in the bucket because I'm not criticizing myself, which is leaking my bucket of acknowledgement. Even if people give it to me, I'm bringing myself down all the time. So I fill the hole in my bucket, and then I communicate that I receive it and I give it to myself. So I fill my bucket from the inside and receive from the outside. So unless I do that, I'm still the 5-year-old when that need emerges, right? I'm still the wounded version of myself because my psyche didn't grow up in that area, because I didn't get to reflect and look at it from a conscious perspective and evolve and correct the problem at the root. I just have the behavioral coping mechanism I developed at 5 that I'm still playing out all the way to this day. So I just keep repeating the same thing on autopilot. And, I keep saying I just for the example, but I don't have adult temper tantrums. Knock on wood, but I used to, but I don't anymore. So not really, this wasn't a big thing of mine. It was more like push people away, if anything. That was my version of adult temper tantrums until I did healing work. But yeah, so I hope this makes sense, right? So it's like, if I'm that kid and that's what I do and that becomes my behavioral coping mechanism, the moment that thing's triggered, if I've just kept this same behavioral coping mechanism since I was 5, then when this trigger happens, I'm still emoting and doing something as if I'm that 5-year-old, because it's a programmed way of dealing with things that I developed at 5 years old. Okay, so our psyche, and I really want this to be super clear, stays frozen in time at the age that we developed really strong coping mechanisms to deal with wounds. And unless we go into those things and do the work and reparent them and change them and show up for ourselves and reflect from a conscious perspective and fill our bucket and close any holes we have in there so that we can deal with the underlying thing that's underneath that coping mechanism, then we still act like we were at the age that we developed these coping mechanisms to begin with. And there are different versions of this. There are different versions for anxious, preoccupied individuals, fearful, avoidant individuals, and dismissive, avoidant individuals. And it's these wounds that we often bring into our relationships that can actually be some of the most destructive things that we do in relationships. Like maybe when you were a kid, if you weren't getting attention from mom and dad, you would seek it from anyone that you could, any bystanders, any people. And then maybe in your adult life, if you're not getting the desired attention from a romantic relationship, you're seeking it from other people. And there maybe like these are forms of cheating on your partner. Maybe you do cheat on your partner because that's your strategy. And it's this adult adaptation you've made from that original program. And so there are so many destructive versions. There's like the way we shut down or pull away. There's the way we push people away. There's the temper tantrums. There's the over defensiveness or attack. There's the spiteful. And a lot of these things are how we originally coped in childhood. And because we didn't do the underlying work, then there's all these challenges and issues in our adult lives around these things. And these can be some of the most destructive patterns of behavior that we have. And these things at the same time are all healable and reprogrammable. So stay tuned for this series, because what I'm going to do is, I hope this makes a lot of sense. I think this is something that's not discussed. I haven't seen this discussed anywhere else. I'm sure it must be in some form or another. But I think this is a huge thing that needs to be addressed. And so in this series, I'm going to do the different versions. So some of these AA wounds, the needs that come from wounds, FA, DA, all of that. Let me know the questions you have and anything you want to see in the comments below. And if you are interested in doing a much deeper dive into needs, we have 2 amazing courses. By mid-October, we'll have our second one. But it's really important to start with the prerequisite of the first one. It's super in-depth as well, prerequisite. I don't know if I said that in a funny way. But that will be on the thing. There's a coupon code again in the description box below. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're getting a lot of value out of this channel, and I will see you in the next video.